How do you get rid of a shape changer? How do you deal with this monster even though everyone in town thinks they're you? You can't just outright kill them because they'll be like, oh, they'll become hostile.
Alex, you got a topic for me this time, don't you?
I do. I was thinking about campaign starters.
Okay.
Or ways to start games. And I had a thought of an interesting opener for a game.
Okay.
And I wanted your input, and maybe we could flesh this out a little bit as a creative exercise. People seem to like it when we've done something before with that.
We're doing theater of the mind.
Yeah, theater of the mind. We're doing improv right now.
As I call it, my mind palace. Let's go to the mind palace.
Great. Thank you, Monk. Doesn't matter what you do with the characters or who they are, but you could do a thing where the characters and the players all start. In the beginning of the game is they're coming back from an adventure.
Yep.
Maybe you've actually played this adventure out in-game beforehand, and this is a start to a new one. Maybe this is a fresh cold open. Hey, you guys have been out of town for a while. You were on this adventure or did this thing, and you just are coming back after being away for months or a year or some not insignificant amount of time.
Sure.
Back to your home. So you come back, and it turns out while you were gone, somebody was living your life. So you come back, and your family goes, what are you doing? I thought you just ran to the store. I thought you were just left yesterday. You went out to go to the other town for a day and said you'd be back soon. And you're like, I just came back. Sorry, I've been gone like 2 years. And your family's just like, no, you've been here the whole time.
You've been body snatched.
Yeah, body snatched, doppelganged.
You've been the doppelganged.
And so I thought it would be an interesting hook.
Yeah.
At the beginning, because suddenly you come back to this family who thinks you've been here the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly it's like, that's not right. Do I have a twin? Do I have an evil twin? You can talk about it, like, what were they doing? Were they just, we were just living a normal life. So obviously your family now thinks you're an imposter.
So, does the whole party experience this?
I think it would be fun if the whole party experienced it.
The whole party apparently came back early. Or they came back like a month before you got there. And everybody just assumed. Yeah.
Yeah, like maybe right after you left, like a week later, you're like, hey, we're all here. This could be an elaborate plot from an enemy you've made on your last adventure, perhaps.
Sure.
It could be any kind of thing. Could just be like something in the town. Could be body snatchers, doppelgangers. But it's like, alright, so either you need to figure out what you've done, if it's a whole party especially, what you've done to get your lives impersonated.
Sure.
Or what's the reason behind this? Maybe there's some great conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
Or perhaps maybe it's just doppelgangers. There's a range of things here that go from, depending what your party is interested in and the players are interested in, between being a very simple explanation to being a very elaborate and complex explanation.
Yes. There's the simple one of just like bunch of thieves were trying to take your lives or something like that, to the very complex one, which I'm sure we'll eventually get into.
Well, I'm thinking
here.
The simplest would be some kind of illusion or enchantment magic.
Okay.
Somebody has come into town and is impersonating you through an illusion, perhaps, or is enchanting people to make them think that you are them.
Got it. Maybe so that you can get access to places that they normally couldn't, or get information that they couldn't.
And it might work really well, perhaps, if one of the players is a noble, for instance, or a member of a holy order, or something that would make sense for them to want to infiltrate. But it could do that with anyone just to take over their life and live a simple life, maybe.
Right. The enemy would have to be aware of your comings and goings. They'd have to be aware that you were an adventurer and you were out of town. So they'd have to have some previous knowledge, which might help you a little bit figuring out what's going on. But,
sure. So I feel like that's a simple explanation. Somebody's come in, they're using magic to impersonate you or make people think that they are you. That's a fairly simple explanation for this. And there's a lot you can do with it too. But we can get more complex.
Oh, yes. There are
You
levels below
can
this.
you can have an actual doppelganger.
Yes.
There are monsters in the monster manual, and most games have shapeshifters that can take on forms.
Changeling shape.
You could have
shifters,
somebody changeling.
shifters,
You could have
man.
somebody that is actually a monster that actually takes your form, is impersonating you for some ill-gotten gain.
We're building Hush for Batman. We're building Batman's version of Hush.
Right.
Okay.
So that's a little bit more complex. You have to,
Yeah.
how do you get rid of a shape changer? How do you deal with this monster, even though everyone in town thinks they're you? You can't
Yeah.
just outright kill them, because they'll be like, oh, they'll become hostile.
Right. Right.
Suddenly that's an issue.
The other one that we've talked about on the show before, but it could be a false Hydra situation.
Sure. It could be something like that. Compulsion effects.
Maybe the thing that's really confusing to you is that you go in and everybody recognizes this other person, but it doesn't look anything like you, because the psychic magic that the false Hydra has just makes everybody recognize them as you.
You seeing it is like, that's disgusting. Could be some sort of fungus or spores or something in the area, or infected water of some sort.
Ooh, maybe it's a fungus person.
Could be.
That would be fun. Here's one of the interesting things that might be going on is that it had something to do with the place that you went. You could start researching and see if anybody else had actually gone into that forest. Maybe it is like a fungal forest or something like that. And there's this tendency where as you go into this place, you imprint yourself on the forest, and they can create a version of you, like stored into memory of sorts.
Sure. And then
realizing.
what would happen is maybe they birth a version of you that is a fungus, essentially, but looks like you and acts like you and has the memories of you, and you're like, wait, what am I doing? I have amnesia. I guess I should just go home.
Right.
Kind of deal, maybe.
And maybe,
something like that.
Yeah. Maybe it was an accident that you ever got out of that forest. You ever got out of that dungeon. Because most people don't. Like the idea is that you would fall asleep, like the spores make you fall asleep, and then you never wake up. And then the spores use your information to build a new version so that it can go out into the world.
And spread its spores.
And spread its spores and start a new den.
Sure. That's almost a false Hydra situation, but with a fungus monster.
Yeah, with a fungus monster that can actually create clones of you. So the fun thing about that is that you think you've been gone for like a month. Turns out you were not gone a month. You were gone years.
Jeez.
And people didn't know. And
Yeah.
so now they've established this, and for all you know, in the city, they've been starting to create like their own fungal like forest in the sewers or in the swales underneath the city to create a new colony, because they finally found one. But they actually, since you've imprinted on them, they have your memories. They know who you are. They know like your personality. They're virtually indistinguishable from you, to the point that most people would not recognize who the real one is. And as far as they're concerned, now you are actually on the back foot, because there's been this like there's been years of new information. That fungus version of you, that mushroom you, has now had experiences that were much more recent and knows more about the town than you do, because you've been away without realizing it. And so now you actually are less of who you are than the person that has replaced you.
Right. Although I feel like a fungus or plant version of you would lack certain emotional depth.
It's possible, but it doesn't, like, it might not be necessarily a plant or a mushroom as an organic life form, but I'm just kind of trying to create more of an analog of what that might be. Like, you think about as something spore-based. But it could be some kind of xenomorphic life form that only exists because it can mimic another creature. It can build versions of creatures that it has been exposed to.
Yeah.
that it's then able to go out and propagate. And so its motivation then is really clear at that point, because its motivation is it needs to propagate. It needs to be able to create these dens, these habitats, so that they can spread. And so I guess that's why I think about it like in mushroom form. But it doesn't have to be a mushroom. It could be a completely new life form that you're not aware of. That maybe because sentient life forms are what it likes to take on, actually does have a sentience of its own. Does have a bit more of a soul. It's now that I'm thinking about it, it's kind of funny that we're talking about this right after we talked about AI, isn't it? where we have something that is not alive trying to mimic the actions of people that are alive and do have brain power. But if the AI, for instance, was an actual organism, you actually had an AI that was essentially an organism. So it's not really an artificial life form, but it is a xenomorphic life form of some kind that you don't really necessarily understand. They can copy whatever they encounter once it steps on essentially the floor of their house. And so they take a couple different forms. They have the one form, which is essentially the spread, the profligation of their environment, and then the ones that are essentially like the clone people, the pod people, crab people, and they go out into the world so that they can then perchance create a new environment that they can go on. I was in my mind palace. I was having a mind moment. Oh, yeah. Anyway, I like the idea of having essentially like an AI, but it's not actually an AI. It's a creature of some kind that can take information that it gets and can mimic it, can build a version of it, like 3D print a version of you with all of the same memories and information, your knowledge, everything like that, go out into the world, but then with the specific agenda that it needs to continually build and propagate itself in new areas.
Yeah.
That would be the larger thing, because then that's a mystery for you. You have to figure out, your team has to figure out what this creature is, who these people are that have replaced you, who else went there, if they are here, again, if there's a marker that tells them what, if they're specifically, resistant, or if they're weak to some kind of damage that you aren't necessarily, used to. Basically, at this point, what we're doing, which
witch
is
hunting.
Just, well, no. Hopefully, we're not doing witch hunting.
Sniffing for truffles.
We're sniffing for truffles. No. We're doing that scene from The Thing. Remember the scene from The Thing with the blood test?
Nope.
You don't?
Didn't see it.
Oh. Okay. You should watch The Thing. I think it would give you an idea for this. But The Thing was an organism that could take over people's bodies, and then it became, like, it became them. Right? But you couldn't tell who the thing was, or who had been taken over by it. Yeah. But there was a test that they could use where if they got a vial of your blood, it was reactive to fire. So if they had your blood in the petri dish and they put the fire to it and it like exploded, then you knew that person was a thing, was one of the things. And that gave the game away.
I feel like it'd be easier just to light a match and have people put their fingers on it.
Yeah, but it's the blood specifically.
Oh.
Like, the blood specifically. But the fear that comes from that particular movie is the not knowing who are the good guys and the bad guys. But if you had a test that you could run, you'd have the fun part of, like, trying to figure out who the creature is. And who is not a creature.
The creature can't get shot by an arrow.
Well, yeah, but it's got to be something that you don't get killed by.
Oh.
Right?
So that's a lot about that. I think that's fun. I had another idea for another complex version that we don't have to go as in depth with, of course. But
Okay.
Maybe it really is you that's been back in town. Maybe either you've done something where you've hopped dimensions or time traveled.
Right. And you're seeing a
And
copy of yourself.
so you have to either figure out if this is a version of you from the past, if this is actually you, or you hop dimension, something spatial and time anomaly. Those are things I enjoy. There could be a lot of things to do with that as well. We don't need to get into those entirely, but I thought the premise of you coming back from an adventure to find out that someone has been living your life for a not insubstantial amount of time would be interesting.
Yes. Yes. And I feel like it's been talked about in different kinds of mediums and forms in some way or another, but I don't see it very much when it comes to, like, the RPG space, where we're doing this as a tabletop role-playing experience. Here's one question, though, that I have, because we can look at it from space or time or dimensions or multi-dimensions or you know, doppelgangers, body horror, whatever way you want. But the question that I then have is, from a role-playing standpoint, is what do you do to actually inhabit the player characters as essentially the NPCs that are their versions of it? Like, you've got me, and I've got my character, and I voice my character, and I act as my character. But now there's an NPC version, and you're going to be running it. Would you expect that the players, once they understand that that is a version of them, and you have notes, would they actually play or mimic that person as well? Would they actually be the character and end the doppelganger? There's a question for you.
There's, I think, a question for other people, maybe.
That might be a question for other people. I'm kind of interested in it, like, from a narrative standpoint, because it's a mystery that they need to solve, but at the same time, it's essentially their character. So now does the NPC still get voiced by the GM, or is the player now in charge of them? And are there rules that they then have to follow where you can tell them something about it? Those
Among Us.
Is it Among Us? Did we just
sus.
make Among Us as a TTRPG?
Maybe.
Scary. Don't
Great.
do that. Anyway.
Now we need to scrap this whole episode.
Scrap the whole episode. Back to the drawing board. Anyway, folks, if you have an idea about how you would deal with that, not just in scenarios, but also how you think you can deal with that in terms of the, like, GM player interaction when it comes to, like, the doppelganger scenario, let us know in the comments down below.